The civil war in Libya is a global affair. Many countries are involved on both sides as the battle for Tripoli intensifies. Turkey is the latest to deploy troops, making neighboring countries increasingly anxious. So how are outside forces shaping Libya's future? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. Libya's warlord Khalifa Haftar is pushing on with his efforts to capture the capital Tripoli. It's in the west where the UN-recognized government of Prime Minister Fayez Al-Serraj is based, while Haftar has the support of a rival government in the east. Libya's been divided like this since Muammar Gaddafi was deposed and killed in 2011. It's more than 8 months since Haftar launched his offensive against Tripoli, and his force have now reached the center of Sirte, 450 kilometers away. The city lies close to Libya's so-called oil crescent, where several key export terminals are located. The advance comes as Turkey has begun deploying troops to Libya to support Al-Serraj's government. Al-Serraj is also backed by Qatar, Italy, and most Western countries, while Haftar gets help from Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and France. Russian private security forces are also reportedly fighting alongside his forces. The UN envoy to Libya is demanding an end to all foreign intervention, saying it's hindering any political solution.
Take your hands out of Libya. The country is suffering too much from foreign interference in different ways. In arms being sold to Libyans, in arms being given to Libyans, in direct foreign military action in Libya, in looking for bases, permanent bases in Libya, in all these kind of direct intervention is making things extremely difficult.
Prime Minister Fayez Al-Serraj was in Algeria on Monday to meet President Abdelmajid Tebboune. The talks coincided with a visit by Turkish Foreign Minister. Tebboune says Tripoli is what he considers to be a red line that no one should cross. He rejected any foreign intervention and called on the international community to fulfill its responsibilities to achieve peace in Libya. Libya's neighbors have been concerned by an escalation in fighting and airstrikes around Tripoli in recent weeks, and after Saturday's attack on a military academy in the capital that killed at least 30 people. Tunisia has tightened up security along its eastern border with Libya. Let's bring in our panel. Joining me in Doha, Youssef Bouandel, Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Qatar University. In Tripoli, Naim Ghariani, member of the Tripoli-based House of Representatives and a former Minister of Higher Education in the first transitional government of Libya from 2011 to 2012. In Rome, Claudia Cazzini, a senior Libya analyst at the International Crisis Group and a former policy advisor to Ghassan Salami, who served as head of the UN support mission in Libya. Welcome to you all. Let's start, Youssef, by the growing concern about the foreign intervention in Libya. This is not something new. It has started with 2011. But why people are now more concerned than ever about the foreign intervention?
Obviously, because there are some new players on the ground. As you said, Libya has been the theater of foreign intervention since 2011, and obviously with Haftar pushing on Tripoli and trying to take over the country, take over the oil installations. So the stakes are extremely high. Obviously, the government of Fayez Al-Serraj, the legitimate government of Fayez Al-Serraj, is seeking help from outside powers. We see that Turkey has sent troops in there. He made visits to, for example, to Algeria with the new president, the new government, and so on and so forth. So the stakes are extremely high, and people are very much concerned about foreign presence on the ground in Libya. We hear Egypt is not very happy with what Erdogan of Turkey is doing on the ground, and it seems over the last few weeks that the stakes are getting extremely higher.
Naim, in Libya, is it because of the Turkish involvement that suddenly everyone seems to be concerned about the ramifications of the regional and international involvement in Libyan political affairs?
Well, it seems so, although the international intervention or the foreign intervention in Libya is not something new. It has been going on for the past 5 years. It's very well documented in the reports of the UN panel of experts that there has been a generous support of the renegade General Haftar since the launching of his so-called dignity operation in Benghazi in 2014. So this is not new, and for the past several years, the international community has been equating the aggressor with the victim. Now that the victim found itself in a very desperate situation to prevent the fall of Tripoli and asked for some help. Everybody got anxious about it. So it's very ironic from the perspective of the Libyan people that the international community only now talks about foreign intervention.
Claudia,
although, as I mentioned, it's very well documented in successive UN reports.
Claudia, there's a great deal of diplomatic activity over the past few days about Libya. Is it part of the regional and international realignment that we have been seeing over the past few months, or is it a genuine attempt this time to find a political solution to the crisis?
No, political attempts to a political solution to the crisis have been going on for years now in various forms and manifestations. The latest has been the initiative taken by Germany to convene the outside actors, including those who support actively and militarily the factions on the ground in Libya, to come to the table and come to a common understanding on what the political roadmap for a future of Libya should be. But the actual ongoing diplomatic consultations are unlikely to produce a real political proposal that the parties can sign up to. First, because many of the outside actors themselves are driven by their own strategic interests, be it Turkey to safeguard the Mediterranean deal, be it Egypt to safeguard its support for the Haftar-led army, or be it Gulf states or the others. But the most important thing is that the Libyan factions themselves at the moment appear, on both sides, appear dead set on refusing negotiations. For months, Haftar-led forces have refused the idea of participating in peace talks. Even the latest proposal advanced by the UN Special Envoy on the margins of the Berlin process was turned down. And lately, on the GNA side, where there was for many months a policy of appeasement and trying to reach an understanding with Haftar, now the situation is entirely different. And they, strong of the Turkish support, are now also turning down negotiations. So the chances at the moment of a political solution are very difficult to envisage.
Yusuf, speaking of the actors that Claudia was talking about, there's a new actor stepping in, Algeria, with his president saying that Tripoli is a red line. Could you explain to us what is Algeria trying to do here?
Obviously, it's the very beginning. Algeria has been criticized in the past for not doing enough as far as Libya is concerned. It was accused by some of the Libyans, at least the opposition of Gaddafi, that they were supporting Gaddafi and offering him safe haven and so on and so forth. Algeria had its own problems over the last few years, and its diplomacy has not been doing what it should be, what it should have been doing. Let's not forget that Algeria was one of the most important third world actors in the 70s and was an influential country in the United Nations. But that role has died more or less over the last 2 decades. Now, with a new president in office, with the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's basically a seasoned diplomat in the United Nations and so forth, Algeria wants to come back to the regional issue. Let's not forget that Algeria shares something like almost 1,000 kilometers with Libya. Any instability in Libya would spill over to Algeria. As, an oil plant was attacked in Algeria, in southern Algeria in 2015, and the so-called terrorists who attacked that came from Libya. The downfall of Gaddafi, for instance, left Libya one of the most armed countries per population in the world. So it is in the interests of Algeria that Libya is stable. Obviously, they talk about national sovereignty, national unity, independence, and so on and so forth. So non-interference in Libya's affairs by the foreign powers is one of the most basic principles of Algeria's policy, and it wants to be seen to do something. It also supports Serraj's government because it sees it as the legitimate government of Libya, and Algeria tries to find the new government in Algeria, the new president in Algeria, tries to find a niche for itself. And Merkel, the German chancellor, invited Algeria to take part in this conference, in the conference in Germany.
Let me go to Naim in Tripoli. Naim, from a government of national accord perspective, what are the expectations as far as Algeria is concerned? We've seen Al-Serraj in Algeria, we've seen the Turkish Prime Minister in Algeria. So what do you think should Algeria bring to the mix?
Well, Algeria is a very important country in the region, and I think this is it's about time for the government of national accord to start strengthening its relations with its Western neighbors who are more sympathetic with the Libyan people. And definitely Algeria is a major power in the region. So we expect full support from our Algerian friends, both in terms of their diplomacy and their influence in the international circles, as well as any other material support they can provide to the government of national accord. It's, again, the irony of the international community narrative that it's factions, Libyan factions fighting each other. That's is not acceptable by the Libyan people. We have a government of national accord that was produced by a negotiated political agreement, was facilitated by the United Nations, was supported by resolutions of the Security Council, is being attacked by militias wrongly labeled themselves as the Libyan National Army, and we know it's just a militias led by a renegade general who wants to take Libya back to the times of tyranny and totalitarian rule, for which the Libyans paid a very hefty price. So this disparity between the two is totally absurd and rejected by the Libyan people.
Claudia, I mean, when you talk to Libyans, particularly those affiliated with the government of national accord, they would tell you that the international community, which should have been an impartial broker of a political settlement, some of them are instead backing Khalifa Haftar to take over Tripoli. Has Europe or the EU become irrelevant as far as Libya is concerned?
Well, to a large extent, EU and member states have become irrelevant in the sense that they have backed in 2015, of course, the Tripoli-based government, but in face of the advance of the forces led by Khalifa Haftar in April, they have not been able to lend or not been willing to lend actually military support to defend or to fend off this advance. So from the perspective of the Tripoli-based government, Europe has become relatively irrelevant. And I think today there was supposed to be a delegation of European foreign ministers, French, Italian, UK, led by Borrell, and German, of course, led by EU High Commissioner Borrell, to Tripoli. And it was significant the fact that the GNA at the very last moment decided to call off this visit and said it was postponed to a later date. So there's a great unease in Tripoli towards the EU. Regarding Haftar forces and the government aligned to it in eastern Libya, they also, to a certain extent, consider the EU irrelevant. I mean, there's a rekindled sort of friendship with the Italian foreign minister after his last visit, and the contacts are ongoing, especially with the French, who have been those most supportive. But Haftar takes the backing that is given to him from Russia and the Gulf states and neighboring Egypt much more than it considers Europe relevant.
Yusuf, all eyes are turning now to the Berlin conference, where many key players will attend, including Algeria, Qatar and Turkey this time. Is this a golden opportunity to reconcile differences between the warring factions in Libya?
Well, it is an opportunity. I wouldn't call it a golden opportunity. First of all, whether the warring factions will attend the conference or not is to be seen. And the second thing is, I think that there are two levels of negotiations here. The first one is to convince the warring factions in Libya to go to Germany and sit and talk. And the second one is to what do sponsors for the two factions want, because while it's played down between the government of national accord in Tripoli and Khalifa Haftar on the other hand, but also these both parties are being supported by foreign powers like your guests from Rome and from Tripoli said. Obviously, the government of national accord enjoys the legitimacy and it is seen as the legitimate government of Libya, and obviously those who support that would like to play by the international law and so on and so forth. But what are the interests of those parties supporting Khalifa Haftar? What are the compromises? It's very, very difficult to imagine, because the two parties, and especially Khalifa Haftar, is on the ground playing on behalf of some local regional powers.
Naim, you say that Claudia, I see that you want to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a clarification. The Berlin conference, if it ever does take place, is not meant to involve Libyan parties or negotiate or be a forum for negotiations between Libya. It is exclusively a meeting that will bring together foreign representatives, no Libyans included so far.
Naim, you say that the GNA is the internationally recognized government of national accord. However, it barely controls 1/3 of Libya. The momentum seems to be now with Khalifa Haftar, who controls more ground, more territory, widely seen by the international community as a bulwark against extremism. Isn't this the moment for some concessions, painful concessions, from all the parties, including you?
I mean, what concessions could you give to someone who wants essentially to take over the country and take Libya back to a dictatorial regime? There are no concessions. Libya is being attacked. The Haftar project has destroyed the eastern part of Libya and Benghazi and Derna and so on, and now he's moving to Tripoli. What kind of concession could you give to such an aggressor? Again, it's very ironic, and I think the international community, especially our European neighbors, they lost all credibility with the Libyan people. They've been watching this going on for the past 4 years, did nothing about it other than just vague statements who essentially equated the victim with the criminal. And now bringing those people who have been part of this aggression and have been supporting it with weapons and with cluster bombs and with airplanes and so on to decide the fate of Libya in the absence of the legitimate government.
All right, let's move forward to another angle in this story.
It's unheard of, where you have a government that's recognized by the international community, excluded from a meeting that will decide the fate of the country, based on the premise that these are two factions fighting each other. It's,
Claudia, you've heard what Naim is basically saying. The growing distrust among the Libyans in the western part of the country as far as the EU's involvement is concerned. And this explains why they are desperate now to see the Turks play an aggressive role. But aren't we here in a situation where the potential for a wider conflict pitting the Turks against the international community there?
Yes, Turkish President Erdogan, when explaining the rationale for the authorization to deploy troops in Libya, said that they're not going to Libya to wage war or to combat, but actually create the conditions for a ceasefire. Implicit in this argument is the idea that by balancing out the power on the ground and supporting the GNA and the Tripoli Misratan forces, he is simply counterbalancing the international support that is being given to Haftar forces and therefore create better conditions for a ceasefire agreement. This is a dangerous bet, because the backlash of Turkish intervention is also very high. Yes, Tripoli desperately needs foreign support, and Turkey so far is the only country that has responded to the request. And let's not forget this. Tripoli made 5 requests to countries to call for their direct aid only in December.
All right.
But the backlash is huge. Arab nationalist revivalism is in the air as well.
We have little time here. Very briefly, Youssef. The UAE and Egypt in particular are staunch allies of Khalifa Haftar. With Turkey now in the equation, do you see any potential for any military confrontation between the two?
Well, it's very difficult to predict, but I don't think that will happen. I think that it will be a balancing act in order to try to bring the people into the negotiation.
Especially with Haftar saying that he's determined to take over Tripoli.
Well, the rhetoric is something different from reality.
Well, Naim, you see that Haftar is moving forward, taking over Sirte, saying that he's determined to take over Tripoli, considers himself to be the legitimate representative of the Libyan people. Could you just give us an idea about how do you see the future of your country?
Well, the struggle of the Libyan people will continue. Libyans will not surrender after paying a very hefty price over the past 8 years to get rid of Gaddafi and his regime, which wasted essentially 2 generations of the Libyan people. To surrender just to repeat the same scenario again for another 40 years. So the Libyan people are going to defend themselves. We hope that our European friends be a little bit more sensitive to the aspirations of the Libyan people. And as Mr. Salama said, the story of Libya is not only the story of oil and gas, and I will add it's not only the story of terrorism and migration, but it's a story of, and it has a human dimension, as Hassan Salama said, but it's more a story of a people who want to put behind the rule of tyranny and move forward and join the rest of the world in establishing a democratic state based on a constitution and the rule of law. And they will fight
Thank
for
you.
that. They
Thank
will
you.
not give up, even if they are alone by themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Naim. It seems that the upcoming days will be extremely crucial, not only for Libya, but also for the key international and regional players trying to find a way to put an end to the conflict that has been going on for quite some time. Naim Ghariani, Yusuf Bouandel, and Claudia Gazzini, thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate your contribution to the program. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Al-Barra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.